And welcome everybody to a very special Sunday roast where we're actually going to have a roast. We are going to have two people roast each other properly. That is
That's
part
not. That's not. I was not told that I'm being roasted. I'm not.
No,
I'm not
I
about this.
wasn't getting that.
I don't mess with the internet, man. There's gonna be comments roasting both of us. Here. They're gonna be like, "Look at this man's lighting is crap," and this is not. No one's being roasted here. Okay, I'm gonna. No, there's no roasting. There's no insults flying here. I'm not. I haven't prepared. I haven't prepared insults.
Have I triggered you?
No, there's no roasting here.
There's
you're
no
betraying the
roasting. We
audience.
don't. We don't. We can just do our own thing, Maj.
You might roast some Tories. You might roast some Tories. Might roast Alex a bit.
I'm sure we could do that. I'm sure we'll fit that all in within this.
But
special.
I'm not roasting anyone else.
Don't worry too much. But essentially, we've got a debate to be had about whether or not we can rejoin the EU. And the main way we're going to do this is going to be very British. We're going to have 5 minutes for each person to have a discussion. Then we'll have an open forum, which will probably last for about 15 minutes. And then we'll give each of our candidates 1 minute to discuss. We're then going to do a second question within that, which is, can we rejoin the single market? So slightly different, slight similarity, same format. 5 minutes, open forum, 1 minute to finish off for both of our respected YouTubers. So let's have a quick introduction from everyone, and we'll start off with Phil. Phil, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi. Yes, I'm Phil. I run the YouTube channel Different Bias, discussing British politics with fairly hefty focus on Brexit and Westminster politics.
Awesome. Big Maj?
Yeah, I'm Big Maj Studios. My channel's pretty similar in that regard. I do want to do more American stuff, but that seems like a dumpster fire on its own, which I don't want to wade into too much as a British guy. They're going to be like, no, you sit down. You stay outside, mate. You stay outside.
We all saw what happened to Piers Morgan.
And I want to say this right here. You think you're a tough guy? Have me back with a boxing ring in here, and I'll wear red, white, and blue, and you can wear your Jolly Roger.
And my wonderful co-host, Max, please introduce yourself.
My name is Max. I run the Robespierre channel, where I talk about British politics in a similar light to the others, and I mainly focus on Brexit. And Alex, finally, can you tell us about yourself?
Hi, I'm Alex. I run a YouTube channel called Political X. I'm an author, historian. So let's get going with this. We're going to start. We had Phil introduce yourself, so let's go Maj first. Maj, you've got 5 minutes to tell us about your thoughts on can we rejoin the EU?
Round 1, fight.
So there's two different levels here. I don't think I'll need 5 minutes because I think the EU question is fairly simple. It's going to be dependent on are we eligible for the criteria within the EU? So you've got the things like the Copenhagen criteria. So it would be looking at our democratic institutions, looking at our courts, anti-corruption rules, all of that kind of stuff, which if we look at the Copenhagen criteria now, we'd probably fail that given all the Russian money floating around the UK, our really dodgy procurement laws, the fact that the court system, despite it being fairly strong, has had issues with the Tories kind of insinuating that they might go to a US courts-based system, and the courts being a bit iffy on some of the decisions they have made regarding deportations to Rwanda, for example. So those are the sorts of things that the EU are going to look at. So if we can get candidacy status, which means like the EU will say, we're going to look at your case. You've got to close, I think it's 24 chapters, I'm going to say, of different aspects of EU law, amongst other things. And so, yeah, it's possible the UK could rejoin the EU. It just depends on that aspect of it. Are we eligible? Do we fit into the criteria? And then you've got the political aspect of it, which is a lot more dicey because the EU could just say, oh yeah, we like you, but you're not in the club, mate. We don't want you back in, or we don't want you in. So the French could do that. And given the fact that the EU want to bring back clearinghouses, something I want to talk about later, but they want to bring back certain financial things back to the EU. They want to bring back euro clearing back into the EU. There was a court case about in 2015. The UK won because we're a member of the EU. And so that was a big L for the Commission, I think, or whoever brought up the case. But the point being is it might be very difficult given the state of the UK now and how long it will take to clear up the mess, along with the fact that it takes a long time to build up goodwill, and that's something the UK, I think, has struggled with historically, given our reputation on the world stage and the nonsense we've done over the protocol. There's that aspect. Can we be trusted as a member? Because the EU are doing fine. They're doing fine without us, dealing with Russia. Their sanctions have been far more effective than ours. And I think a question would arise, would we have hampered EU sanctions against certain Russian oligarchs, given the amount of money that's flowing around the UK right now? We are the laundromat of Europe. So these are the things that will get looked at potentially, especially with a lot more scrutiny, I think, if we did apply to rejoin. But given the UK large market economy, it depends how we look 10 to 15 years, because we are capped by Brexit now. That's something Labour are concerned about. If you look at the secret meeting that happened between Gove and Lammy and the rest, I think Labour understand there's a cap, because it doesn't matter if they revive manufacturing. At the end of the day, who are you going to sell it to? That's the key question. And so the UK needs stability. It will need a period of stability where we don't look like a basket case. And I think if the Conservative Party accept that we have to be a member of the EU, like there's no other way about it, then I think things in the EU would change. But there would have to be tremendous goodwill within the UK. Would have to accept things like freedom of movement. Absolutely, that's something where you had the idea of the proper Europeans, the proper ones, the British ones, maybe French, Germans, etc., versus Romanians and Bulgarians, which was something Farage weaponized. So we're going to have to accept freedom of movement and other things, which will be very difficult, I think. And these are the things that you will look at, because member states are generally treated equal. Some are treated more equally than others. But I'd say, given the different sizes of economies within the EU, it's a fair-ish system. There are still issues, of course. But I think absolutely we could rejoin. The question is, are we going to fit the criteria, and is the political will going to be there? Because, like I said, they're looking at taking financial services away from the UK and other things. So, and, the EU supply chain have rerouted outside of the UK. So the question is it worth it to them politically? All of the nightmare the negotiations it's going to come with. That's the key question. So it's a twofold question of, are we eligible, and will the politics allow it? Because I can imagine, any French president would say no, political classic de Gaulle, and just say no. And that's the thing he's most known for, saying no to us. I think in England, at least, not trying to lead the French rebellion against the Nazis. He's more known for saying no to us, I think, more famously in England, which is unfortunate. But yeah, that's what I see. I don't know. How am I doing for time?
Very good.
Oh, you're great. That's it. 5 minutes.
Oh, mate, look at that, mate. You don't miss.
Wonderful. Phil, your turn.
Yeah, so I don't know what sort of a debate it's going to be. I'm not disagreeing with any of those points at all. If we were ready to join now, if the scales had fallen in everyone's eyes and the British public was demanding of our politicians, we want to rejoin now. But that's not what it's going to be. There's going to be a lot of incremental stages that will get us ready for acceptance. And there are our interests, whether or not we wanted to go back to the EU. Whether or not we wanted to go back, they're in our interests. But I will give you two massive reasons why it absolutely is in the EU's interest. There's a lot of focus on the fact that the EU hasn't suffered horrendously from losing the UK. But consider, first of all, why the EU was ever formed. In various guises, it was a peace project. And ever since that, what happened was there were two periods in the 20th century when the rest of Europe weren't best pleased with Germany. Now, after the first little period, the reaction was a bit of cold shoulder, treat them very badly. That didn't work out very well. So then the second time they went, right, okay, well, completely different idea. What about this, lads? What we'll do is we'll form a union around them. And that works superbly. And ever since then, we have not had any war between the major powers of Europe, or indeed any powers of Europe that were part of this union. That is unprecedented in history. So the UK outside of the EU is a security issue for Europe, because although no one at the moment seriously thinks we're going to declare war with France, despite what the Daily Mail keeps saying, nonetheless, at the moment, who are we most like in Europe? Only Belarus. Now, imagine that we are frozen out of the EU, that we realize we need to join at least the single market or whatever. We need to have a much closer relationship, which is now even government policy. And we're frozen out, the de Gaulle, no, right? But we're a large country, we're a powerful country. So we then say, well, we need to make our own way now in opposition to the EU. So we're like Belarus. Only we're a Belarus with the joint largest military in Europe. That is not in the interests of European security at all. In fact, the EU, one of the pieces of, when let's be honest, it's probably going to be Labour, formed the government that negotiates the trade and cooperation agreement, you are going to have Labour wanting to form much closer ties. And you could argue, well, where's our leverage with the EU? Where is our leverage? The leverage is the security deal that the EU wanted. That's what we bring to the table. Trade-wise, we don't have much leverage because we are not applying proper import controls to EU goods. There's no standards controls. And that is our primary motivation for at least wanting to rejoin the single market. We don't have standards controls. It is going to blow up in our face at some point, and we have no way of putting them in place without strangling suppliers. I was saying to my partner again, who's moaning about the fact the shopping arrived on Friday and it's all out of date already. A week's worth of shopping, it's all gone, and the fresh food's knackered. Unless you go to somewhere more expensive like Ocado, which we sometimes do, it don't last more than a couple of days. If you're lucky, some stuff's come in to sell by date, same day. It's come at 6 o'clock in the evening. Well, this clearly isn't our tea. What we're supposed to do with this? So there is a massive imperative for us to at least rejoin the single market. But the leverage from us comes from the fact that we have the joint largest military. Other countries in Europe are now alive to the threat to security in Europe, but they don't want to spend much on defence, whereas the UK, although it's cutting back at the moment under the Tories, tends to be quite militaristic. So, that is a huge... From our point of view, we're going to see that our standard of living is not going to get back up to pre-EU levels until we start to move much more seriously back. From the point of view of the EU, what they don't want is Belarus on their northern border as well, with a massive military that, wants to find alliances, wants to find ways to maintain an economy, and is frozen out of Europe. That just makes no sense. But all of this is going to take time. There are issues we have to address. We're not ready right now to rejoin, but nor is the public ready to rejoin. And I actually think, although the normal process is to apply to join the EU and then the other bits come as part of that process, I actually think we're going to take baby steps towards it. And I think what is certain is closer alignment and security deal next term, because Labour have promised that, and the Conservatives now are coming to that idea anyway. And I think we will, when it comes to the single market and customs union, which I know you want to talk about separately, I think those steps will come first. I think we will try things. But that's how I see it going. Long-term project.
Brilliant. That was 5 minutes. Perfect.
Fantastic.
Right. Open forum. We'll put on a timer. I won't give between 10 and 15 minutes. Just to let the conversation flow between both of you. I think you both put interesting statements forward. You both brought up slightly different issues with it, which is quite interesting as to what could either hold us back or get us in. Max, do you have any thoughts?
No, I'd like to open it up. I think Phil said something very interesting about the security issue and how that could be used as leverage. And I'd like to hear what Big Maj has to say about that. Well, also some of the things that Phil has to say in response to. I know you said at the beginning you agree with pretty much everything that Big Maj has to say. He's painting more of a negative image, if I'm understanding correctly. Of
Are you calling me a hater? Is that what you're saying? You're saying I've got haterade in this mug? Is that what you're saying? I'm downplaying this country. Am I the problem with this country?
He's slightly more pessimistic, I think, or maybe you disagree with that.
I mean, if you give me something to be optimistic about, sure. I'm not going to go chanting around, Man United are going to win the league. Yeah, we're way behind. I'm, just cautiously pessimistic. I guess that's how I define myself. Of, look at the reality of the situation, and you're like, yeah, that looks a bit shit. I'm not going to be happy about it. How do I fix it? Rather than me saying, yeah, it's going to be great. Don't worry, it's going to be fine. I'm like, no, that's not how life works.
So, Maj, do you have a response to what Phil has said?
Yeah. I think using the security argument, I think we can get security arrangements with the EU, but arguing we're going to be like a Belarus would be that's a really dark road that the UK would have to go down for that to happen. That would be kind of like an almost fascist state, like a dictatorship. I think I hope that doesn't happen. Genuinely, that's some dark shit right there. But I don't think that will happen. At least I hope so. This Johnson government is the closest we've come to anything, or I guess, yeah,
but
anything
we've
come
to
anywhere.
Didn't they? The legislation they put in place to remove those rights was that Johnson administration thinking that, or whatever he doesn't think anything. Let's be honest. He just thinks I want to be king of the world, like he was when he was a kid.
Whenever anyone asked him what he wanted to be, he would answer world king.
But his advisors were telling him this is the route we have to go down, because they know that Brexit's damaging to us. They're not just going to want us to just wither and die. So they were recognizing that they were going to have to put in measures to control the population, to control dissent, because there is going to be dissent.
But do you think it's more likely? Sorry, do you think it's more likely that the UK, if we go down this route, do you think there's more chance of us kind of rebelling against a fascist government in that case, rather than us accepting a fascist leader? I know we're shit at protesting in this country, but let's not forget we did have a civil war in this country, and we didn't go down the French route of beheading the monarchy and getting rid of them, but it did happen in this country a long time ago. But do we behead a king?
King of England, you have been found guilty of high treason against the good people of this nation, represented in Parliament, by whose authority this court does sit in judgment upon you. And upon this charge, it is the sentence of this court that you be taken hence to an appointed place and put to death by the severing of the head from the body. And that is the sentence of the whole court.
So we beheaded King Charles I. Then we put in a governorship. We had a parliament. It didn't really work. Then we had a governorship. And that was under Cromwell. And everyone was pretty hacked off about that because he was a Puritan. So, for example, they banned Christmas, which, as you can imagine, doesn't particularly go down very well in many parts of the country.
I'd support that.
So Cromwell dies, and essentially, after a couple of wranglings, but the monarchy is brought back because Parliament isn't good enough on its own. They hadn't quite twigged maybe getting a president-elect might have been a solution to it instead of just bringing back the monarchy. So we have done that in the past, and we have had proper rebellions in the past, but more in the distant and the near past compared to like the French Revolution.
I would query whether we had one at all. It wasn't a popular uprising. It was Cromwell.
It wouldn't have to be
it was a rich guy's army against another rich guy's army.
It wouldn't have to be a popular uprising, though. You just need like a decent amount of people to be upset and be frustrated with the country. Because I think there's more chance of us kind of rebelling against some sort of fascistic state. But to go down that road would be there's a lot of steps there that would have to happen, and the country would have to go into terminal decline at that point for it to happen. That's my only issue.
There's not that. If you look at, say, what happened in Italy, Spain, and Germany, there weren't that many steps really.
But you had the Great Depression.
All you had to do,
you had the Great Depression, though. That was the issue.
Well, not in all cases, but what you actually had was you had something that was clearly wrong, and someone else telling them it was caused by something completely spurious. Now that is what we've got here in this country. Yep. Now, you could argue, and I'm much more optimistic now, because you can definitely argue that people are not, because I thought, when COVID hit and they were hiding behind COVID, and I just thought, shit, they've now got something to muddy the waters with. And of course it works on some people, but it hasn't worked on as many people as you think, because, regret has increased, support for remaining out has dropped. Obviously, it doesn't matter about popular opinion. It matters about the few 100,000 that actually swing elections. But, so I'm much more optimistic now that but at the same time, the legislation that is removing our rights is still passing through Parliament. And the only thing that's going to stop it, our only check against it, is Tory MPs waking up and going, hang on, this is too far. And if that doesn't happen, the people aren't going to stop it. What happened in 2021? There was a bit of a public backlash against the government, who weren't going to deal with all the shit being pumped into the rivers. Then what happened? Government, we'll put some stuff in. Then the Owen Paterson scandal broke. People were distracted by that, and then they just sneaked it through Parliament anyway. Now we've got a load of shit being dumped into the rivers. No one's outraged about that. And that's the sort of thing that pisses off Tory voters in the heartlands.
Yeah.
No protests. They're not even protesting in their own local party meetings. They're just going, terrible state of affairs, terrible state of affairs. Do you want the fish tonight? No, I won't have the fish tonight.
That's one of the issues with trying to rejoin the EU, though, because if we're in this kind of state where we don't have a written constitution and we can pass legislation like that, they're not going to want us in as part of the EU. That's what's going to happen. That's one of the reasons why they haven't admitted a country like Turkey, is because their democracy is just not up to scratch. So why would they accept the UK in such a state where we're heading down a fascistic route? Like, they're not going to accept us as a member.
I get your point on Turkey, and I also get your point on the here and now. But what I'm also saying is, there are going to be reforms because we need them, and that there is going to be political consensus for them. Quite apart from, like, realistically, we're certainly not even going to talk about rejoining the EU for another 3 years, and that's best case scenario. So your best case scenario is that for the election following the next one, say 2028, that there's genuine talk about maybe. See, for me, I always think the customs union should be a first easy step, but I can't deny the fact that one country has a customs union with the EU but not access to the single market, and several countries have entry to the single market but not customs union. So I can also see, but as you were mentioning before, the freedom of movement is going to rankle a lot of the racists and xenophobes, maybe for some time to come. But I also still think that for a lot of people, they will get outraged at stupid things. But when they can't afford to heat their homes in the winter, and when they can't afford to eat every day, and when they're having to go round the corner for the cheap meat, which is actually poisoning them because we don't have standards controls maintaining a minimum standard on these things, I think at that point, ordinary people's ideology sort of goes out the window a bit. What they want is the government that's going to, help them feed and clothe their families. And the hard Brexit we have is a real threat to people's living standards. And people are starting to see it, and you are getting some people trying to fight. I just look at this. Even the government are now saying, yes, Brexit has damaged our economy. They've just come out and said it yesterday. I mean, that's quite something.
Quite shocking,
and
isn't
you
it?
just and you think this is 25 months after leaving the single market and customs union, and there's maybe another 20 months before the next election, and how much further will it go then? And then you think, with a much more. I know, Labour aren't being completely honest about Brexit, but it's not going to have as many constraints. It's not going to have to, for example, appease little factions in the parliamentary party. It's purely about trying to stay in line with voters. That's their only constraint. So they can talk much more positively about the benefits of closer harmony with the EU. And it's really like a direction. People will see the last 6 years of government policy being moving away from the EU. Well, that's hurt us. Then they'll see a few years of moving towards the EU. Well, things are getting better. And, it's very easy to see, well, if we move closer, will they get better still? Oh, yeah. And I just think, there's a real chance for that to happen. I think it would help if people who want to make that argument can make it in a more organized way to people, to ordinary voters. It's the easy way to harangue politicians about it. And I think they should be harangued. That's what they're there for. But I think ultimately they move when voters move, when the key voters move.
I think one of the issues is with Labour MPs. I think there is a slight faction because you had Lisa Nandy talking about how EU kind of doctors and nurses have taken away opportunities from her constituents. So I think there is still this kind of idea that citizens from the EU are taking away opportunities from British people, and that exists even within the Labour Party and kind of their voter basis. So I think those Labour MPs are terrified they'll lose their seats or lose support in those seats where they have heavy Remain voters. So I think there's still kind of fears within that's in the front bench. There are still fears within, with Labour MPs about freedom of movement. And if you can't convince them about the benefits of freedom of movement, then I think you're going to struggle to convince MPs because it's down to politicians at the end of the day to convince people. It's not the other way around. And so if Lisa Nandy's out there saying, people from the EU have taken opportunities from my constituents, you took everything they worked for, motherfucker, it's not going to. That's a Nate Diaz for you there, but that's it's not going to work out. It doesn't. You have a lot to do to convince people just on the benefits of freedom of movement, and it's just not. That's not happening. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's where the difficulty is, especially when you're going to have people like Nigel Farage or maybe a new Farage type. We had Bill O'Reilly, which we thought we were unlucky with, and then we got Tucker Carlson. You're like, fucking hell, can you give us a break, please? So be like, look at the EU candidacy list. You've got Turkey, you've got Serbia, you've got North Macedonia, you have so many other countries, and they're going to be all here. Everyone from Serbia or everyone from these countries is going to be here by tea time. You're going to have no houses and all that nonsense, just like he pulled back against Nick Clegg. And you're going to have a decent amount of people who are going to fear that stuff. I know we're going through demographic changes. I know that younger people are less conservative. Shouts out to my generation for actually, not falling
So-
for this nonsense.
There is
No
there is
ageism
something
here.
there is something interesting to bring up with all of those points. One is Schengen and whether or not we'd be in it or out of it. And Ireland is not in Schengen, so that would have some restrictions. I'm not saying complete, but it would.
I think.
But then
Go on,
Cameron did renegotiate part of those deals as well to include about people coming over to the EU, and it does say within the EU stipulation to have a job within a set period of time within the EU. Now, it was really interesting as well because Nigel Farage got pulled up on this and denied all knowledge. But the irony was, he was like, "Oh, I was in Belgium. I never heard of any of this." And there was literally a documentary at the same time he was saying that coming out, I think, on the BBC, talking about how Belgium had the ability to find people and remove them from Belgium if they weren't within work within a set period of time, or they'd been out of work for a set period of time. So those things exist. If you want to implement them, then you've got a bigger argument about business versus the population. Because business obviously wants labour from across the EU. Local populations, for example, it would appear Boston, aren't particularly keen on these issues, and we can still see that with some of the results. Just thought I'd throw that in there.
I just want to say about Schengen. Yeah, I just want to say about Schengen, I don't see Schengen as a problem because Ireland is not a member of Schengen, and Ireland and Britain have the common travel area, so that sort of covers them. It allows Ireland to be exempt. Well, Ireland doesn't have to join Schengen, so if Britain joined Schengen, and Ireland would have to join it. But that's a sort of opt-out in a sense.
I think one of the reasons why Ireland didn't join Schengen was because of Britain. So I think that they might, they might actually get something out of Schengen.
There's no real benefit if there's so much trade and there's so much flow of people between Great Britain and Ireland, so there was no benefit really of joining Schengen. But I don't see Schengen as being a requirement.
I was just going to say, if we go back to kind of the argument here of, if we make the argument, if you don't let us into the EU, we're going to become like a fascist state, or we're going to, we've got a military here, we're ready to make a move. I don't think that's going to go down with the EU, especially when we realise that we would get lit up. Like the British military, according to military experts, we're 10 years behind. Having like a functioning military, that French Navy are going to be in there into the English Channel real quick. So I think arguing like, we're a security risk, you have to let us into the club, otherwise, bad shit's going to happen to you guys.
It's not an argument. It's not an argument we make. Would be the argument within the EU. The EU, like for example, you're going to see this with Ukraine. Not right now because Ukraine is in no fit states to be an accession member. You're going to see a lot of politicians in Europe really wanting Ukraine to go through the stages because Ukraine represents a serious security threat in Europe. At the moment, they've got a very pro-EU government. You cannot guarantee that lasts. At the end of the day, they know it's like it'll be a European version of Afghanistan. You need to support. They'll need to support Ukraine. And access to the single market will be part of it.
And we're going to have to end there. So I'm going to give you all 1 minute to give your final speeches over. I believe we started off with Maj. So I'm going to do the closing statement with Maj first. You've got 1 minute.
Sure. I think it all depends on what the will is within the EU. You got the Copenhagen criteria. The EU have set rules that we're going to have to abide by. So that's there. You can Google that. That's fine. It's all about next will be the political dilemma of do we let in the UK? Are they stable? Are they going to be a risk, especially with not just Russian money, but it could be Arab money, it could be Chinese money, it could be American money. Any country, we're open to corruption. We're open for business if you want to send donations. But point being is that the EU are going to look at these things, and I think that yes, the UK could be a security concern depending on how bad our decline is and who kind of takes the mantle. If we get like a Mussolini type character saying, "Oh, it's all the fault of the EU," we're going to go fight them next, or it's all the fault of someone else, because it always is. It never is your fault; it's someone else's fault. Words to live by. So I think that would be the main issues in terms of rejoining the EU. The UK aren't ready. I think we'd need a written constitution and we'd need stronger courts in order to enforce that constitution. And my time is over.
Nice work. Phil, you ready?
Yeah. So, first of all, a lot, as I said before, a lot of the things that we need to deal with would be dealt with anyway. Until we want to, as a country, and until we're really determined to rejoin, there is not going to be an argument for it. You know, we have to want to rejoin, by which point we won't have a government that blames the EU for everything, because we won't stand for it. You know, we will have to sign up to the EU's anti-tax avoidance directives. That deals with a lot of the London Grad issues. If indeed the next Labour government don't decide, it's a thorny issue. I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of people in the know going, this is a right can of worms you're going to be kicking over here, but it's going to need to be dealt with anyway. So a lot of these issues have to be dealt with. Politically, it has to be settled. You know, the EU have been clear about this. If it's not obvious, you know, you cannot have any party coming to government that would derail the whole process.
Brilliant.
Very
Thank
good.
you both.
Fight.
Can we rejoin the single market? So, Phil, you start.
Well, in all honesty, we will have to, and it's there's several reasons why. First of all, it's an absolute nonsense, this idea of compensating with exports around the world. You can talk about it empirically. You can look at the fact that doing that means it takes longer for things to get here. So the idea of a just-in-time supply chain, you've got like automotive factories or something like that need parts, and they're only going to carry a couple of days worth of stock. That you can't get them from Japan. So there is no possibility of a just-in-time supply chain when you're trying to increase your trade around the world. It's always going to be subject to things like volatile fuel prices because it's coming by a boat. If you're lucky, it doesn't fall off the boat into the sea, because that's a thing. And then there's the other side of it, which is if you look at where the money is, where the consumer power is in the world, a lot of it is concentrated in Europe. There simply isn't enough money around the world to compensate, because the world isn't full of the amount of money we trade with Europe just sitting waiting for us to somehow make it easy and you know to want our goods. The world can already buy our goods. We're not getting better terms. So that's a nonsense. But then the thing is, and this just doesn't get mentioned enough in the media, we have a serious problem with imports. So it's not just about the exports, it's the imports. We do not have import controls. We have customs procedures. People have to fill in all the customs documentation, say what's in it, so that duties may be applicable. But what if someone lies on the documentation? A few months ago, customs found a lorry chock full of cigarettes. There was no attempt to hide it. Obviously, it wasn't. The documentation did not say it contained cigarettes. And there's loads of duties on those. There was no attempt to hide it. And the reason for that is because they know there's hardly any checks taking place. They're just sending whole lorries through. They caught this one. It was the biggest haul ever. And the reason it was the biggest haul ever is because every now and then they'll catch one, and the smugglers are just so blatant now. They know that almost everything gets through. They're just sending it all in. No attempt to hide it, all just jammed in there. We are losing a fortune. And then there's the standards controls. We don't even have the documentation for that. So we've got criminal gangs sending in cheap meat because, of course, there'd be checks around the EU. There's none in Britain. So it's unfit for human consumption. I described it recently as Gordon Ramsay's kitchen nightmares in a lorry.
That is disgusting.
Passing through. In October, they did let's find out how bad the problem is. Over a 24-hour period, they checked 22 lorries. 21 of them contained food that was like maggot infested or otherwise totally unfit for human consumption, cooked and uncooked meat, all the rest of all the nightmare. And that's coming through every day. And at some point, we're either going to let in a disease that rips through our livestock, or something is going to happen that massively backfires on us. And I'm not saying the government won't be able to excuse it. There's all sorts of tricks they can employ, but it is going to massively backfire. So it's not sustainable to have no import or standards controls. And yet, we can't just put them in place. Michael Gove himself said we need about 50,000 officials.
It's estimated there's going to be a need for about 50,000 new customs officers. Is it feasible to recruit and train that many people in less than 6 months? And who's going to foot the bill for it? Good question.
Yes, it is, and the government stands behind it.
Can't get 50,000 officials. You can't get that many and train them up. Where are you going to put them? We haven't got the infrastructure. We're an island. You know, you can't just expand outwards. That's the sea. So, we're completely knackered on that as well. So it's unsustainable to be outside the single market. It's not just suboptimal, it's unsustainable.
Very good.
Ready? Maj, when you're ready.
Okay, cool. I think kind of feel what you've listed there is a lot of UK side issues, and the EU can turn around and say, in the words of Toby Maguire, I missed the part where that's my problem. And so if we look at kind of the EEA and the single market, right now, according to Article 128 of the EEA agreement, the only way to join the single market or to join the EEA agreement is via EFTA or by becoming a full member of the EU. And that's one of the key problems. So they did ask an expert back in, I think, 2015 it was, Dr. I'm going to butcher this, I'm very sorry, Dr. Ulf Svendrup, I don't know how to pronounce that. And he was asked multiple questions about, the single market and other things. And he also said that the EEA is constructed of two pillars. You either become a member of EFTA or the EU. And so he was asked the question, can the EEA be expanded? And he said, the EU's preferred model would be to put countries in the single market where they don't get a veto and they don't get things like voting rights. It would make sense. They pay into the budget. The EU gets all the benefits and less of the downsides. The problem is the EFTA countries are very much against the amendment of the EEA, and the EFTA members are a part of the EEA, so it would have to go through them. They have to sign off on it. And the EFTA countries right now, they don't want to renegotiate the EEA agreement because their markets are. I think there are less countries than they were when they negotiated originally about 25 years ago, because countries left to join the EU. And so they feel like they're in a vulnerable position. So unless the UK somehow got the EU somehow got the EFTA countries to renegotiate the EEA, that's not going to happen. Norway are dead against us joining EFTA because of our size. You've got a market of 5 million people in EFTA versus a market of 65 million people in the UK. EFTA see that as kind of a threat to us because at the moment the EU doesn't negotiate with EFTA when it comes to putting in new trading arrangements, but they do say, this is what's happening, this is how it's going to impact you guys. And EFTA, it's important for them to speak with one voice. If they have any issues, they kind of discuss it. They can't really do much, but they can say, we have an issue. But then you've got a situation where EFTA is being outsized by the UK if it was in the single market, where the EU would have to set up consultations with the UK in that context and say, this situation, this was happening. And one of the issues I have with the system of if the UK join the single market is who governs over disputes, because EFTA have their own court system, EFTA have their own agreements, which apparently, according to Dr. Svendrup, there are issues where he thinks the EFTA kind of courts are siding, the EFTA kind of courts are thinking, what would the EU courts do in this situation, and deciding like that. So there are lots of issues with EFTA. To the point where I think Norway has debated for a long time, should we have just joined the EU, or is that even possible? Should we just become a full EU member? Because then we get voting rights. We sacrifice on fishing a bit. I think we sacrifice on farming. But was it worth us staying the way we are versus becoming a full EU member? And I think given the fact that the EEA would have to be amended, that's one of the key issues there. And the EFTA countries have said no. They're very keen on us not to join EFTA. They're very keen on the EEA not to be amended. And if the EU said, all right, fine, we're going to ditch you guys and we're going to make a new agreement with the UK, you guys, see you later, sayonara, guys, that's not going to go down well internationally. Because you're not, I would argue in some ways getting an amendment to the EEA is more difficult than joining the EU because you have more member states that are involved in this. And I think that's one of the key issues where if we talk about rejoining the single market, it's a very big picture thing. And it's not as easy to say, we'll just rejoin the single market. It won't be an issue, which a lot of commentators have said. And it's like, well, how are you going to do that, Chief? What's the process? And I think that's maybe something Phil and I can talk about in a few minutes once my time's up. How am I doing for time?
We got 2 minutes. We've got 1 minute.
Sweet. I can coast. But yeah, point being is you're gonna have to amend the EEA agreement. This is why talking fast really helps. I've perfected it, and that's very difficult. I get told off for it all the time. See, I can even do this stuff. But yeah, that's the point.
You don't have to use the whole time because we can just go straight to
I have my time. I'm going to use my time. I will not be told how I can use my time. This time has been allocated to me by the host. That is you. You cannot take my time from me. Okay? Time is one of the few luxuries we have in this world. Okay? How am I doing?
Oh, you're finished.
Oh, that's bullshit. I guarantee you I've got 30 seconds. I guarantee you I have 30 seconds.
Go on, 30 seconds if you want it.
All right, sure. That's kind of my argument. It's a legalistic, very boring argument of these are the rules. You play by the rules. If you do not play by the rules, we will take our ball and we will go home, sir. Welcome to the Brexit, as a Dutch man once said. But that's my point of it's not as easy just to say we'll join the single market. It's very much, yes, you have size, but if you're overruling the EFTA kind of countries, the EFTA countries are going to look at you and say you're a bit too big to be in this group, and you're saying, no, mate, you're not small enough, you're not big enough to bully us. And that's kind of my issues with the argument. See, I'm done. Look at that. Time management pro, you know.
Good work. Okay, let's just go straight into the open forum then. We've got 15 minutes. Let's talk.
So I'd like to just to give a quick introduction to this before we get into it. So I think the main disagreement between Phil and Big Maj is the way to get back into the single market. So maybe Phil, as Big Maj was speaking before, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, he's absolutely right. It's not a case of as soon as we decide we want to join the single market, we just say, can we join the single market, please? Waiter, come over here. We would like to order single market access. We are going to have to negotiate, but ultimately this is politics and economics. A large economy, is it's like in the EU, you have, Maj was saying earlier on, you've got member states that are sort of equal, but some are more equal than others. And the ones that are a bit smaller, the way they often extract concessions is they wait for something where it requires unanimous support. And then they go, right, this is where we get some shiny things for ourselves. So the UK is not even going to attempt to rejoin the single market until it fulsomely wants to. I mean, I keep going on my channel. There's people that I think are a bit too impatient about it, and I can understand it because we're suffering every day we're out. But until there is a real pressure from within this country to want to rejoin, it's a non-starter.
I think,
but as soon as there is, go on, sorry.
I was going to say, like from the EU perspective, right? I don't represent the EU. Shout me if you want to sort that out. But point being is, like, from the EU perspective, we have kind of the rule set. You're going to have to go through how does the process, once we say, all right, we want to be in the single market, we were stupid, we didn't realize how good we had it, blah blah blah. What's the process? Do we contact the Commission? How does this process go? That's the question.
It has to obviously begin with the Commission, but as you say, it's going to be a completely new process. Because I completely agree. And there are people who keep saying, well, we should join EFTA. And it is a non-starter because our economy eclipses all of the existing EFTA countries combined. And we have a very different way of doing things. It'd be a bull in a china shop. So that's a non-starter from my point of view. It's also true, of course, that EFTA will be wary, as you say, of renegotiating the EEA. But again, wherever there's a political will to do something, there's always a way. And it will be difficult and it will require a lot of technical discussions, because the other side of it also, as you say, is the EU would have to want us back into the single market. It's not enough for us to just ask, but we are a large consumer market. And again, I go back to this original thing that the whole purpose for the EU is ultimately the security of Europe. A country or a collection of countries in a whole continent is prosperous when it's secure, and what you don't want is a rogue state with a massive military and dickheads that keep getting elected off your north coast. So, and all while ever Northern Ireland remains a part of the EU, that's always going to be a powerful motivating factor as well, which we can't forget. So there will at some point be a lot of political capital from America as well. America will get involved, if nothing else, around like securing peace in Ireland. And you will have immense political will to get this done. But it does have to begin with the UK saying there's no debate anymore. The debate is over. A bit like climate change. When I was growing up, it was treated as if there's a debate. Now, even though you still have climate deniers and you still have them in government, most people go, yeah, we've knackered it, haven't we? And we need to fix it.
I think what I'd say is, what's the process? Because again, if we can't really ignore the freedom movement stuff, but we debated it earlier. That's fine. With the court stuff, the EEA has its own court. EFTA has its own court, right? What's the system for dealing with disputes and all of that kind of stuff? Because what I'm trying to argue is the scale of the problem is so tremendous that it's just not going to be worth it for them, because they're going to have to set up a new court system. You're going to have to convince people in England in England predominantly to be rule takers, not rule makers. All of the arguments that Brexiteers used back in 2016, they will bring back those arguments, and it'll be much harder this time round to argue against it. But the only thing we can argue really is the economics and the trade side of it.
I would say it's the other way around. I would say you'll point out that we are rule takers right now, but we don't have a say. We were rule takers before, but we made the rules. You get someone to point to an EU rule, and in 97% of the cases, it was Britain that either came up with it or came up with it. And whereas now we're still following the same rules. If we want to trade with any market in the world, we have to follow their rules. We do not decide any market's rules anymore. We're not even deciding our own. Australia told us what our market rules are now. So, we literally decide no rules, but we have to follow them all. Where do we have a say? Nowhere.
There's a really interesting case that's come up with Nissan and Ford both saying they're pulling out the UK, despite Nissan getting paid quite a hefty amount of money. But one of the things I suddenly twigged was Biden's green policy, where he's offered, is it 370 billion?
Yeah.
For green manufacturing, production and supply chains within the US. So from what I could tell, the US military have realized that actually getting stuff from abroad is a really dumb idea when they've got everything inside the US. Even if it saves money, long term, it's not sustainable. So they put this policy forward. But with green, this is part of the reason why we're losing manufacturing. But that then means we're now caught in the middle of a US pull from manufacturing and yanking all their stuff out of the US, and they're just going to transport it over the Atlantic. And the EU sectioning off, we're literally smack bang in the middle.
There was a Bloomberg piece about it where basically the EU are looking at how do we compete with the US in terms of green subsidies. And so it was basically the EU are saying, look, we're not going to go to the WTO here. We're going to do this on our own, and we're going to try and drag as much manufacturing as we can into the EU. There's, both countries are, or both countries, both
blocks.
Both blocks are setting up semiconductors to build their own CPUs, so they don't have to be as reliant on Taiwan. So that's a big deal as well, because one of the reasons why car manufacturing is struggling is not just because the economy is in a mess, the global economy, is because they haven't got any chips. That's the main problem. And so what they're doing is setting up a semiconductor, because what they can do is everything in-house. They can build as much of the car parts as possible. They can get as much of the electric vehicle battery as possible, as much as the CPUs as possible, build it all in-house. And when you go to export it, generally, the tariffs are a bit lower, I think, rather than doing it on individual parts. So what that means is they can sell into other markets fairly easily, which is kind of what their goal is.
But I think, just to interrupt for a second, I think everyone is pretty much in agreement that the UK needs to be part of that. It needs to be part of the European framework now. It needs to be part of the single market. But I think how does the UK actually get back in there? That's the problem.
Max is looking for violence here. Max is looking for us to dispute. He's an instigator here. He's the instigator. He's trying to get us to fight. But I guess it kind of goes back to the question of, we know where the path to the EU lies, right? We've already discussed that. I think we agree largely on that one. My question is around the single market, because that's why predominantly I am here, I think, is to kind of debate there. And I think that what you've listed is a load of UK reasons to join the single market. But I think given the scale of the problem with who deals with legal disputes, the committees, all of the kind of work, and, if you look at the headache Switzerland have given to the EU over coming up with agreements, agreeing to things, the UK could give the EU far more headaches if it wanted to. And that's one of the reasons against us being, because if we look at it like this, right, to amend the EEA, you're going to need all of the EU member states and all of the EFTA states to agree to it. Good luck with that. That's going to be really difficult. You're going to have to set up new mechanisms to deal with all of that kind of stuff. And then it's not viable, in my opinion, to do that kind of mechanism. What the EU will tell us is just try and put your application to rejoin the EU, because it's going to be way easier, because the EFTA countries are adamant they are not going to do this, and they are happy to say no. They're happy to say no on this, because they have the power here. They have the leverage. They don't necessarily need leverage, but they have the power in this regard. So in my opinion, us trying to join the single market, get these new mechanisms set up, is a very British way of thinking of, we just get a bespoke deal. That's the issue I'm having here, if you see what I'm saying.
Phil?
Well, they are always bespoke deals. In many ways, for me, it would be a lot tidier if we did just decide to rejoin the EU. If the country was in a place where it said, we're being killed here, we're losing all the manufacturing, but, we're not sure about this EU thing, but, can we just rejoin the single market? And then it was like, actually, it's just way easier to join the EU. And some bright spark was able to say, and if we join the EU, we also get to decide the rules we're going to accept anyway. And actually, do you know what? Pay less. The likes of Norway pay more for the size of their economy into the budget to be part of the single market and have no say.
That's what I mean. If we try and rejoin the single market, Norway are going to say, look, we paid more than you per capita. Now time to get your checkbook out because you're paying in big. You're paid in big. That's kind of my issue.
Even as far as the GDP is concerned, Norway pay way more.
And this is what I mean. They might be against us, or they might try and use it in negotiations against the EU, and it just causes more headaches of them saying, "Oh, look, they paid way less than us per capita. We want to pay less into the EU budget now. We want to pay less for the services we get," and that's what I mean. It's going to cause a giant headache within the EU and also within EFTA because they haven't renegotiated this thing in I think 25 years, which is a long time.
Well, it's very complex. You don't want to.
That's what I mean, and we're dealing with very complex things here, which have a lot of moving parts. And generally, that's why you divert to experts like the one I cited earlier from Norway. And given the EU's preferred model is countries to join the EEA and get single market access, that hasn't happened. And the reason that hasn't happened is because EFTA are like, no, they either join you or they join us, or they're not part of the single market. That's it. And that's where the dilemma is.
The issue will be in the UK is, and the reason why I think there will be a major push to try and join the single market first, is because if you then go down the route of saying, actually, it's just easier to join the EU and we'll have a say then you have to deal with the issue of the euro. Now, you can look at it and go, there's several countries that joined after adopting the euro was mandatory, and they have not adopted it because you keep asking, and I keep saying, you go to Poland, how's it going? Brilliant. How are you going on with adopting the euro? Oh, it's fantastic. Is it going to be any time soon? Oh, it might be next century. And in theory, you can do the same. But you can't say that if we had a campaign for a referendum to rejoin the EU. You can't say, look, we'll have to commit to adopting the euro. Wink, wink, but it might take us a while, because that would be bad faith. So you will have to act. And what you can do is you can have a referendum that says, in principle, can we negotiate? And then we'll have another referendum when all of the terms are sorted and it's all clear and debated on whether we make the final step. And you can say that, and you can try and say, we will attempt to negotiate retaining the pound. But again, I don't know in 10 years' time or 15 years' time where we'd even be on that issue.
That two referendum argument is one Jacob Rees-Mogg used. Which I started earlier. But the issue is, I think, given that if we go back to the single market, the issue there is just joining that on its own is a nightmare. Now, I get if you're saying we can convince people to join the single market and say, actually, instead of joining the single market, we should join the EU as a member state, and then we'll get all of these benefits rather than that kind of thing. But I think fleshing out the process of how do we rejoin the single market, I think that's maybe a worthwhile project for yourself to do. I know I've done it, and it's so much reading.
That's because no one knows. That's because the process that takes place to achieve it does not exist at the moment.
And that's what I mean. It would require an amendment to the EEA, but I've kind of listed how you kind of get an amendment to the EEA, which is ridiculously difficult because you're going to have to get EU countries to agree to this, EFTA countries to agree to this, and then you're going to get other countries saying, do you know what, how about we join the EEA first, and then we get our full membership with the EU later on when everything's kind of sorted out, and that way we have access to the single market. You guys can export your goods, easily, and it will help us out, it will help you guys out. And that's one of the problems they've run into, because as I said, countries have asked, can you just amend the EEA and let us into the single market? And EFTA were like, no, we're not doing that. And that's the problem we're going to keep running into.
Can I just say one thing? As it's so positive.
No, Jesus Christ! Come on, man. Alex, control your friend.
We tend to focus on the UK a lot, but there was a reference to France earlier on in the chat. But are there any other countries that could be a problem? Because one mention I heard was Ireland. Because now Ireland at the moment would not be resistant to Britain or Great Britain rejoining the EU or the single market, but potentially a Sinn Féin led government could be a problem. I don't believe that, but some people do.
I think with that question, it's because obviously Sinn Féin want Irish unification. It's above everything. So the UK joining the EU, or however you want to phrase it, would be a bit difficult for them because it would resolve basically all the issues that we have now. But I think that's a tough one. It depends how powerful Sinn Féin are within Ireland. But I think Germany, given they're trying to build their service industry up, and other countries like France, they're also trying to do the same. They're trying to bring as many clearinghouses into the EU as possible. Maureen McGuinness is on that one, and she looks very determined to do it. I think that would be one of the issues. Sorry, what was the question again?
Which country?
Ireland. Which countries?
Ireland,
sorry.
or
So France could be one. Germany could be one, because the French ports, I think, are dealing with this stuff okay. It just depends on which countries I think want to build up their service industries and things like that. And they can look at the UK and say, what can we take out of this? And kind of keep permanently, because the City of London is very, very powerful. You've got top lawyers, accountants, you have everything there in one place, which I don't think many other financial centers have. If you look at even America, Delaware is very powerful when it comes to certain financial aspects. That's where Joe Biden made his name, I think, in Delaware. They have a lot of financial institutions and things like that there. So I don't think even the United States might not be as kind of joined up as the City of London is in that regard. And so they're trying to piece away as much as they can. If you look at, we're out of the Lugano Convention now. So if one of the EU member states said, we want, a lot of court decisions to be made here and our solicitors and lawyers to make loads of money here, that might be one of the things that they look at and say, we don't want the UK in the EU because we want our country to be a financial power or a service industry or whatever. They could be against us very easily in that context. So it just depends on what they want to take away from the UK and, what they want to keep. Sorry, I've jacked all the time. Apologies.
Phil,
do you want to just?
Yeah, I don't agree with that, I have to say, because again, it's time. By the time we're ready to do this, those movement of services will have already taken place. And once you move something, it doesn't move back, unless there's some compelling reason to do so. Germany, for example, we were incredibly close with Germany in the EU. Germany, we're an ally to Germany. France, we're right next door to them. They don't want us pissing about. Ireland, again, Michael Martin has been saying recently that we were, worked very closely together in the EU as well. So all our immediate neighbours worked well with us. It goes back to what you maybe said earlier on. It's the Eastern European blocs that have a different. That's where there's a lot of differences of opinions, not so much the more traditional original members.
I think just Alex, if we're going to Fergie time here, just quickly.
We're not speaking bum time.
Come on, no. Okay, so one question, right? No. If the UK loses all of these financial services, right, and all of these things, right, what would the UK have to offer the EU in that case? Because we would be a big market, yes, but we would not have as much money as we do now. We would not have, size, GDP, and all that kind of stuff. So, surely the argument of we're a big economy, we're developed, and all that kind of stuff would fall by the wayside if a lot of our financial institutions went. In that case.
The services you're talking about are a really tiny part of the City of London's portfolio, like really small. In fact, as Brexit goes, as exit from the single market goes, with a trade and cooperation agreement that basically doesn't cover services, the City of London's fine with it. It's absolutely fine. It's lost what we would consider eye-watering sums of money, and it doesn't care. I read the Financial Times quite a lot, and it's quite happy. I mean, obviously the individuals involved in it, but what you're finding is the people who dealt in those derivatives say have just moved. They've moved to France or Berlin or wherever.
Yeah. It's a slow puncher. That's what's happening. I mean, Max and I were talking in a previous program about Milan. They're growing. They're having a little economic boom in Milan at the moment because they're getting all the financial services.
Yeah, there's
if you're a banker and you've got millions of pounds, wouldn't it be nice to go and spend some time in Milan or in any of the other capital cities around Europe where there's a bit more sunshine, there's nice food, less rain? Why not? Warmer
There's
climate.
more rain in Paris than London.
Yeah, but not in Milan. We go to Milan.
Paris is beautiful. So on that note, I think we can finish there unless anyone has a 30-second little speech they want to make at the end.
Sure, I'll take one, Phil, if you want to go for one after. But I think my issue is, with us, the conversation about rejoining the single market is I think there's a lot of context and a lot of reading that has to happen, and people really need to understand how the EU works, how EFTA works, and how the EEA works. Because, like I said, to get an agreement changed on that would be tremendously difficult, and the question would be: are the UK worth all of this collective sacrifice here when we're not even a member? Perhaps when we were a member, you could have gotten away with this stuff. As Barnier said recently, leaving the EU didn't necessarily mean leaving the single market, but we're not a member anymore, so they won't make concessions for us.
And Phil, last 30 seconds.
Again, it will always come back. I'm going to sound like a broken record. It will always come back to the basic reason the EU exists. The idea of having a country basically be like Belarus, but with a large economy and a large military, doesn't make sense to anyone in Europe. Yes, there's going to have to be. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be incredibly difficult for lawyers and politicians, but there will always be a way.
Perfect. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you, both of you. Thank you so much for coming
did you
on.
get the violence you wanted? Did you get the violence you sought?
Yeah.
Did you get it?
I had put sawdust on the floor, but it was useless at the end.
Max was ready for a referee stoppage. He was going to step in and say no more. He's done.
I've been watching Mortal Kombat. Hoping for some finishing moves to come out.
Finish. Yeah.
Alex is waiting for a fatality to be issued on screen. Good.
Is that a beard you got there, Maj?
It is. It's a beard, yes. It's a beard.
Oh, nice. How long have you been growing that, bad boy?
Grew it this morning.
Good work.
No. It's got a speak there.
You convinced the robots are going to come in and take over?
Well, given what I've heard about ChatGPT, yes, and then given what I then heard about ChatGPT, no, because it doesn't know when Avatar 2 is playing. So this guy got into a massive argument about, because he asked, like, can you show us where Avatar 2 is playing? And he goes, Avatar 1 is a film by James Cameron. And he was like, what about Avatar 2? I was like, it's not out yet. And he's like, what's the date? And it's like, it said like the 14th of February. And he goes, when did Avatar 2 come out? And it was like last year, December. So like, so where's Avatar 2? And then it's like, it's not out yet. And I was like, no. It tried to argue with him. And he goes, the machine goes, I'm not being aggressive. I'm being assertive. And I was like, oh, that's not a good look. And so the machine accused the guy of trolling the machine.
He's fucking. What the fuck?
I saw on Twitter.
So basically, the way the robots are going to take over is they're going to gaslight us.
That's what someone was saying. You know, ChatGPT is going to gaslight the human population, and it was pretty funny.